Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 4th of August 2021 Ordinary Council meeting of the Norfolk Island Regional Council. Today, we are joined by the Administrator, who is coming into the meeting remotely, and this is due because of the border closures that are in place for both New South Wales and Queensland at present, which is our servicing routes for airlines. So the Administrator was unable to be on island for this meeting. So therefore it is coming to you remotely, and there's myself and the minute taker in the room, and there's no one in the public gallery at present. Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager, and my apologies to the community for not being on island, as has been explained. It's due to the border closures around COVID. I always attempt to attend the council meetings in person, but just not feasible today. I'll start by requesting the General Manager to recite the statement of respect. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. The Norfolk Island Regional Council promotes a climate of respect for all. We will endeavour to inspire in our community's shared civic pride by valuing and protecting our unique culture and environment, both natural and built, for the current and future generations. We, the Administrator and staff of the Norfolk Island Regional Council, undertake to act with honesty and integrity, to conduct ourselves in a way that engenders trust and confidence in the decisions we make and the actions we take on behalf of the Norfolk Island community. We acknowledge the Norfolk Island people, the traditional custodians of this island.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I just ask if you could remain upstanding for a moment further, please. While I note that we have been notified of one condolence notice, and that is of Mira Patricia Edith Martin, who died on the 8th of July 2021. And I just ask that we observe a moment's silence, please. Thank you. You may be seated now. Mr. General Manager, for the record, are there any apologies?
No, there's nil.
And again, for the record, are there any disclosures of interest?
There's no disclosures of interest.
Then I'll move to item 5.1, which is confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 7th of July 2021. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Administrator, the minutes are presented for your consideration, are a true and accurate record of the meeting held on the 7th of July 2021.
Thank you. I'll note that I have checked these minutes and I resolve that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 7th of July 2021 be confirmed. And I'll move to item 5.2, which is the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on the 16th of July 2021. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Administrator, the minutes are there presented for the extraordinary council meeting, are a true and accurate record of that meeting held on the 16th of July 2021.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I have personally checked these minutes and I resolve that the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on the 16th of July 2021 be confirmed. And I will move to item 6, which is the public access session. Mr. General Manager, have there been any requests for public access?
There's been no applications to speak to you today, Mr. Administrator.
I'll move to item 7, which is the section for the Administrator's minutes. I note that there is an item at item 19.1 relating to the departure of Mr. Bruce Taylor, and I will deal with that item as an Administrator's minute when we reach item 19.1. So I'll move to item 8, status reports. I note there are no status reports. Move to item 9, reports from committees. I note that there are no reports from committees. So I will now move to item 10, reports from the General Manager. Item 10.1 relates to an invitation to Council to have a sister community relationship with Bundaberg Regional Council. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is a letter that we've received from the Mayor of Bundaberg Regional Council, Mr. Jack Dempsey. He wrote to us back at the 30th of June, and it came from a discussion that was held, I believe, at the LGAQ Policy Executive meeting, where there was some discussion and consideration about whether Norfolk Island Regional Council would eventually become part of the Queensland local government system. And Mayor Dempsey, forever proactive, has written a letter to us to ask to see if the two communities can join in a sister city relationship for benefit for both the community and the council. There's been a long history of a number of former Bundaberg residents that have relocated to Norfolk Island, and so there has been and continues to be a number of connections between our community and the Bundaberg region. One that comes to mind is a former solicitor who served both the administration and council for a number of years, and I think he's now retired back to Bundaberg, but was here for many years. But what we put before you is the idea that if the sister city relationship is to work between ourselves and Bundaberg, it would be best served if it was embraced by the community, not necessarily just the council. And that's where we would gain most benefit for the community, whether it's schools or community groups, or even exchanges of resources or secondments between the two places. It would be best served if the community embraced it. Therefore, we're recommending to you, Mr. Administrator, that we refer this request to the advisory committees that you put in place a month or so ago, and we're just about to go to market to find those participants from the community to join these committees in August, with hopefully a report to you at the 1st of September meeting. So I recommend that we do this. We refer this to the Business Innovation Tourism Advisory Committee, and I write to Mayor Dempsey and the CEO to inform them that this is the process.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I was very pleased to see the letter from Mayor Dempsey. Certainly an indication that folk on the mainland around the Bundaberg region are particularly interested in a relationship with Norfolk Island Regional Council. That's a very good sign. Having had some experience with sister relationships at other councils with which I've been connected, I am aware that these relationships need to be supported and driven from the community. So I take the point that you have made, Mr. General Manager, about that. That would be premature for an administrator and a general manager to proceed to form that relationship or agree to that relationship without knowing the level of community support for it. And also without getting some buy-in and commitment from the community to participate in that relationship. So I accept your recommendation, and I resolve just a slight modification to the wording here. One, that council write to thank Mayor Dempsey and the Bundaberg Regional Council for his invitation, and advise that given NERC is currently under interim administration, the matter has been referred to its advisory committee process to generate strong community support for this relationship. 2, that the matter be listed as a priority for the Business Innovation and Tourism Advisory Committee's first meeting once formed, and provide council with a recommendation on the Bundaberg Regional Council's invitation. And I will move to item 11. Item 11 is reports from the Manager People and Culture. I note that there are no reports there, so I'll move to item 12. Item 12 is the reports from the Manager Corporate and Finance. The first is item 12.1, a report on the Workers' Compensation Scheme update. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This report also reflects an external audit finding 113 that we're finalising here. This report is to provide an update on the reconciliation and the determination of the financial position of the Norfolk Island Workers' Compensation Scheme before it's handed across to the new provider, which is Gallagher Bassett. Prior to the scheme, prior to the handover of the scheme, it was administered by Council through the service delivery agreement we had with the Commonwealth, but we recently moved that across to Gallagher Bassett. Before you is a report to show that we've now reconciled the financial position of the scheme as at 30 June 2021, which shows a $55,300 payment required to NERC as we funded the scheme during that place. A claim will be made against the Commonwealth for these funds as part of the reconciliation of the 2020-21 SDA accounts.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I note that this report is here just for Council's notation, so I resolve that Council note receipt of the update on the reconciliation and determination of the Norfolk Island Workers' Compensation Scheme financial position. And I will move to item 12.2, which is the investment report. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is the investment report for June 2021. The purpose of this report is to note the investments held and to provide an overview of Council's cash position as at 30 June. I take you to the section of the report that shows restricted cash of Council is 3.8 million, and we have an unrestricted cash balance of 915,000. It shows monies that are held in trust, which is 641, and a cash projection, which will be for 30 June 2022, which is the important figure for our operations, and it's showing that our estimated cash and cash equivalent position will be 3.3 million as at that point. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Just so I'm clear on this, the estimated cash and cash equivalents as at 30 June 2022, the starting figure there is 915,000. Then you have the cash, the net cash movements. Is that 3.369 million a projection of unrestricted funds as at 30 June 2022, or is it made up of unrestricted funds and other components?
It's made up of, it will be both restricted and unrestricted. If you see, there's an unrestricted funds as at 30 June 2021 of 915,000. It's got an annual, it's got the net increase of 2.4. Just on the surface, it would include both.
Okay. All right. So potentially the unrestricted component in round figures is still sitting around that, just under that $1 million mark at year start and year finish. Is that correct? I'm just interested in this in relation to whether the Commonwealth Bailout Fund is going to carry us through to the end of June 2022.
Yeah.
And my interpretation of these figures is that it is. Is that your advice to me?
It is, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. I resolve that Council notes the investment report for June 2021, and I will move to item 13.1, which is the economic development section update. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This is just the normal report that we bring each month, and it shows some snapshot of visitor numbers to both airlines and airline statistics and visitors numbers to museums and movements within the liquor bond. So it's interesting to note that I think if you see on page 43, through the visitors of museums, you see the month of June in 2020, we had 5, and this year, this 2021, we had 2,243. So I think I just wanted to highlight there the statistic change in 1 year because of COVID. This time in June 2020, it was the height of COVID. And that's probably reflected in the airline statistics that you see above as well, where there was only 34 people on the plane for the month of June as compared to 2,000. So it also highlights that, you know, we're in the quietest months of the island. June, July, August are generally the quieter months. But this report just highlights that, and I think it's quite stark when you're looking at those things.
Thank you. I just turn to page 44, and just under the heading Carver Museums, just trying to be sure I understand, is that reference to 2019 in the first line, is that correct, or should that be a reference to 2020?
Yeah, so that's an error, Mr. Administrator. That should be June 2020.
So it's against 2020. Thank you. Okay, well, this is all, it's encouraging what was happening in the latter part of the 2021 financial year. Are there any trends developing that you're aware of, Mr. General Manager, from, you know, the impact of the current effects of COVID into July and August and September that you could inform me about?
Yes, we've definitely seen a market downturn in visitor numbers, and that primarily is come about because of the Queensland flights now being restricted. Whilst I said earlier June, July, August were traditionally quieter months for the island, we were fortunate because Australians couldn't travel anywhere else, that we still had reasonably good numbers for July and August. And I've had a number of business operators reach out and let me know that numbers have just decreased quite considerably, and that's primarily because the Queensland market is now closed, as was Sydney, which is about 5-6 weeks ago now. So the island is certainly seeing the effects of no flights, and the number of people coming to the island has dropped to near single figures on planes, and so that will reflect eventually in our reporting for July and August.
Thank you. This report is here for notation, so I resolve that Council notes the information provided in the report, and I'll move to item 14.1, which is the services update. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This report just gives us a brief update on a number of building maintenance and ground maintenance items that have been undertaken. We're seeing considerable work progress on the footpath and roundabout project as you come into town. I certainly think you'll see a significant difference, but when you do get back to Ireland from 5 weeks ago when you were last here, where the footpath is forging ahead quite quickly and the roundabout is almost cured, and we'll be driving on it, I believe, in a couple of weeks' time. And that's probably the highlight for this services area for the last 4 weeks, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. I did see the initial stages of that construction work of the roundabout and the footpath, so I will be interested to see the projects completed when I am able to get back to Ireland. I just noted under the heading Lightridge, the description of an 8-day gap between the first and second day of unloading of the Southern Tiari when it was last there. I'm just curious, is that common? I understand that's a result of the sea conditions, that they started on a particular day and then they had to stop and wait for that 8-day period before they could start again. Is it common to have a gap of such length in the unloading or loading?
I believe from time to time that does occur, and I have heard, and I haven't witnessed it, but I have heard from staff that sometimes they could be up to a month. That the ship, I think that's only ever happened once, but yes, it does happen. That's because of the seas that we do encounter here around Norfolk. So it's just an additional challenge. You know, we had to stand up twice for that process, but the Lightridge team and the stevedores, for that sake, are all well versed in this area and handle it in their stride, and they go back to their normal jobs during that period, and then they stand back up when it's good to work again. So they're very efficient in that regard.
So, Mr. General Manager, can you enlighten me as to who carries the risk of the cost of that ship sitting off the island as long as it does? I'm familiar with demurrage costs for the coal ships that sit off the mainland. You know, while they sit there, it's at the cost of the clients. Who carries the risks for the cost, such as the cost of the 8-day gap?
I'd have to check, but from my understanding is it's those that are importing the freight.
So there's a component of the freight charge that relates directly back to how long that ship is sitting off the island.
Sitting off island, yeah. So all those costs, but I'd need to check on that, Mr. Administrator, to be 100% certain. Okay,
fine. Look, I resolve that Council notes the information provided in the report, and I move to item 15.1, which is development and building application number 11/2021. Mr. General Manager.
Before you is an application from B. Tomlinson, which is for portion 32C3 Stockyard Road, and it's for a general purpose shed. And the reason it's before you is it's encroaching into the minimum boundary setback. The report runs through the details that needed to be considered, but it's recommended that the DA be approved because it's consistent and it complies with the relevant provisions of the plans for the application to be recommended for approval.
Thank you. Just for the record, I note that the subject land is portion 32C3 Stockyard Road. The application is for a general purpose shed, which encroaches into the minimum boundary setback, which is the reason why it comes before council and hasn't been dealt with under delegation. The application, I have viewed the application and the assessment report, and I understand it will be available for viewing by the public at the planning office. It's proposed to site the shed within the standard rear boundary minimum setback for the rural zone, but the activity is permissible with consent, and the shed building is generally described as a 3.5 metre high shed with an area of 56 square metres, with walls of corrugated colorbond cladding in ironstone colour, and similar roof construction. Clause 12.1d specifies the building should be set back a minimum of 10 metres from the front boundary and a minimum of 3.6 metres from all other boundaries. But it's proposed to site the shed 2.5 metres from the rear boundary. And our planning framework provides for an applicant to seek a variation to the setback requirements giving consideration to matters that are specified. The applicant's reasons for seeking the variation to the minimum setback is to maximise the use of existing level land available at the site and minimise the need for earthworks and redevelopment of the topography of the site, and consequently minimise the overall environmental impacts on the development land. No submissions were received in response to an invitation for written submissions on the application. The application's been assessed by council staff, who concluded that the development complies with the aims and objectives of the Norfolk Island Plan, and it has been recommended that council recommends to the minister's delegate that the application be approved, subject to conditions which have been provided to me. So in relation to this, I believe that this should be approved on the basis of the assessment that's been undertaken, and I resolve that 1, the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(2) of the Planning Act 2002 Norfolk Island, in accordance with the statutory requirements of that act and in accordance with the recommended notice of decision, makes a recommendation to approve DA-BA 11/2021, described as applicant B. Tomlinson, subject land, portion 32C3 Stockyard Road, proposed use or development, general purpose shed, encroaching into minimum boundary setback. And 2, the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(4) of the Planning Act 2002 Norfolk Island, refers DA-BA 11/2021 to the minister's delegate with council's recommendations on the application. I'll move now to item 15.2, which relates to DA-BA 17/2021. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is a DA from an applicant, Mr. R. Ford. Subject land is portion 23A7, Poverty Row. The proposed use or development is for a shed ancillary to existing rural industry, which is encroaching into the minimum boundary setback. It is recommended that council recommends to the minister delegate that the development application is approved, subject to conditions in the notice of decision below for your assessment. Happy to take any questions from you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I have read the application documents that have been provided to me. This is an application in relation to portion 23A7, Poverty Row. The proposed use or development is a shed ancillary to the existing rural industry, encroaching on or into the minimum boundary setback. It's been recommended that council recommends to the minister's delegate that this application be approved, subject to conditions which have been provided to me. I understand the application has it has been reviewed by myself and will be available for viewing by the public at the planning office. The development is permissible with consent because it's proposed to site the shed within the standard site boundary minimum setback for the rural residential zone. The shed is a 2.8 metre high shed with a floor area of 76 square metres with walls and roof of green colour block. Clause 17(1)(c) specifies that the building shall be set back a minimum of 10 metres from the front and 3.6 metres from all other boundaries. It's proposed to site the shed approximately 1.4 metres from the northwestern side boundary. An applicant can apply to vary the setback requirements for the rural residential zone, with council giving consideration to specified matters. The applicant's reasons for seeking the variation to the minimum side boundary setback are to make use of existing poles that are already concreted into the ground that previously supported shade cloth cover over growing beds to avoid the need to remove the poles and replace them at another site, and that resiting the poles towards the southwest to comply with the 3.6 minimum side boundary setback would result in the shed encroaching into the driveway at the site. No submissions were received in response to a request for or an invitation for submissions. Council staff have assessed the application. They found that the development complies with the aims and objectives of the Norfolk Island Plan and have recommended that Council recommends to the Minister's Delegate that the application be approved with conditions. The recommended conditions of development approval are intended to preserve the physical and social environmental qualities and values of Norfolk Island and to minimise harm to the environment in construction of the development. And in conclusion, the application is consistent with and complies with the relevant provisions of the plan, subject to compliance with the recommended conditions for approval of the application. I intend to approve this application. I therefore resolve that 1, the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(2) of the Planning Act 2002, Norfolk Island, in accordance with the statutory requirements of that Act and in accordance with the recommended notice of decision, makes a recommendation to approve DABA 17/2021, described as applicant R. Ford, subject land, portion 23A7, Poverty Row, proposed use or development, shed ancillary to existing rural industry, encroaching into minimum boundary setback. And 2, the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(4) of the Planning Act 2002, Norfolk Island, refers DABA 17/2021 to the Minister's Delegate with Council's recommendations on the application. And I will move to item 15.3, the Planning and Environment Update. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Administrator, before you see the monthly update from Planning and Building, statistics are shown there for the number of development applications that are received in July, which is 8 in total, covering residential and 1 commercial. There's been no BAs for July. We move on to waste and in the environment, and we cover off on things around composting and the operation at the Waste Management Centre and waste exports. We continue to export waste on a toll freighter. It's important to note that it's general waste, which is the residual waste that's been exported. You know, we're not exporting recyclables, which is highlighted in there, which is, you know, cardboard and the like. It's being stacked at the moment. The car baler we're just seeking a replacement starter motor at the moment to get that operational again. And there's an update there on Argentine ant eradication program. It continues to do work with the detector dog in zones across the island, and that's highlighted in the map. And that's about it. Have take any questions from you, Mr. Administrator.
I just have some questions on our waste management and the changes that we're proposing to make for 2021-2022. Have we now implemented the new ticketing system, or can you advise me where we're up to in relation to its implementation, please?
Once the rate notices go out, which is hopefully this week, once they start to be paid, once residents commence paying the waste management fee, they're enabled to go into the customer care office and pick up their book of tickets, which we will issue once the payment has been made. I believe the print houses on Island is still printing the ticket books, and there was a few adjustments, you know, to meet the resource that we had here. I don't think we had enough paper, but in essence, we've made do with what we have here, and we should have that in place by the end of this month. So we won't see anybody really paying the charge until the end of August, early September, and at that point we'll start to see the new ticketing system in action at the Waste Management Centre.
So for the time being, are people still using their old tickets when they get to the waste centre?
They are, and I believe that it's now requiring, the old tickets were $2. I think it requires now 2 tickets when attending the Waste Management Centre, because the fee was raised from $2 to $4 as at the 8th or 7th of July when we adopted the charge.
Okay, and we've given some publicity to our position on the waste changes. Are people generally, people who are coming to the waste centre and being faced with having to pay the equivalent of 2 old tickets for what will become the new ticket face value, are we finding that is being generally accepted by the community?
I haven't had any feedback from the manager to the contrary.
Thank you. And we made a commitment to a waste management review during 2021-2022, and there are going to be some fundamental changes to our whole approach to the operation of the waste management system. Can you update me as to when people may see the evidence of that, you know, some work being completed on that in terms of there was to be considerable amount of community participation in this process. One of our advisory committees, I think, is we're expecting to play an active part once it's formed in it. I'm just curious at this stage, and I know it's very early days, but we're already into August now. Just curious to get some reassurance that we are moving quickly to put in place what we said we were going to do for 2021-2022.
Yes, we certainly are, Mr. Administrator. I believe the manager has had a number of community meetings and targeted meetings across the area of waste. He's even taken myself and the island administrator down to Headstone to discuss the changes that we're wanting to put in place there for Headstone. There's considerable community feedback so far of support for closing Headstone and moving the collection point into the Waste Management Centre, and he's in that process now of now developing a flow or a collection flow at the Waste Management Centre, and he is working with a number of community groups that are really passionate about this, and so it's progressing quite quickly. And to your point, the advisory committee, the terms of reference will be finalised towards the end of this week, which I'll provide to you for review, and we're hoping to go to the community and call for people to be on that waste advisory committee. It's not just waste, I think it's environment committee, so that we can have people in place from 1 September to take on the next phase of that waste education / change program.
Oh, that's excellent to hear. Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Just looking for the recommendation here. It's on page 58. I resolve that Council notes the information provided in the report, and I'll move to item 16. I note there are no reports from the Manager Customer Service. Item 17 is notices of motion. There are no notices of motion. Item 18 there, it refers to urgent business without notice, and I note, is it correct there's no urgent business?
No, there isn't, not this month.
Okay. And then we did have listed at item 19 a staff matter, which I want to deal with in open council. So item 19 is to acknowledge, or 19.1 is to acknowledge Mr. Bruce Taylor before he departs from council later this month after a very lengthy period of exemplary service. So, Mr. General Manager, I'd ask you if you would like to speak to this one, please.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I'm just trying to find the notes that I had. If you could just bear with me for 2 seconds. I think I've got it here. I wanted to take this opportunity to formally recognise the great work Mr. Bruce Taylor has not only provided Norfolk Island region administration of Norfolk Island, and with a combination of two, it's in excess of 18 years he's provided for this community, and you know, it was with sadness that I accepted his resignation. At the same time, I really recognise once you've done your bit for your community, it's also time for yourself and your family, and to make the most of that. So I wanted to personally thank Mr. Taylor for his support, knowledge, and honesty, and feedback he gave me from time to time during my first 18 months here at Norfolk Island Regional Council. I certainly have benefited from his knowledge of not only the organisation but the community. And before you, I wanted to put in writing just some of the things that he's achieved whilst he was serving. So I'm happy to read this if you'd like, Mr. Administrator, or would you like to read this section about Bruce?
No, it's a report that you have prepared, so I'd like to hear you read it, and I'd like it to go on the permanent record through the videoing of this meeting as a demonstration of council of its great appreciation to Mr. Taylor for the exemplary work that he has carried out for the Norfolk Island community, both to the council and to the administration. So please go ahead, and I would like to see all of it incorporated into the record.
Okay, just a bit of background. In the 18.5 years that Bruce Taylor has served Norfolk Island Public Service, he has held many positions and seen many changes in people, governance, systems, processes and legislation. Bruce's career has spanned a large number of portfolios across the administration and the council, many at the executive level. In fact, there aren't too many areas of either organisation that he has not been involved with at some point, which has culminated in an incredible amount of corporate knowledge. It is with sadness that we advise that Bruce will be retiring from council and will finish on the 20th of August 2021. A little bit about Bruce. Bruce qualified with a Bachelor of Commerce from the Uni of New South Wales in 1977 and registered as a certified CPA of Australia in the following year. After an illustrious career in the private sector with organisations such as Rothmans and BHP, he relocated to Norfolk Island as a restaurateur. Bruce began his public service career with the ANI in the position of Expenditure Accountant on 24th of March 2003. Ever the overachiever, he regularly acted in higher duties and performed the role of Assistant Finance Manager as well as his substantive role until the end of 2007. In January 2008, Bruce was appointed to the first of his government executive roles as Executive Director, Corporate and Community Services, a position he held until 30 December 2010. During this time, Bruce often acted in the role of Chief Executive Officer and held many legislative delegations, including Acting Site Manager of Carver. In early 2011, Bruce accepted the role of Acting Deputy CEO and was successfully recruited to that position in March of the same year. In October in 2011, he began the first of his longer-term stints as Acting CEO and led the ANI until the appointment of the new CEO in June 2012. For the remainder of the ANI's term in June 2016, Bruce remained as Deputy CEO and often acting CEO, assisting the organisation in transitioning to a new governance model through difficult circumstances. On 1 July 2016, Bruce began his tenure with the newly formed Norfolk Island Regional Council as Group Manager Services. The last 5 years, Bruce has been an integral part of the executive team. His wealth of corporate knowledge and diplomatic leadership style has been vital in building good relationships, forming partnerships, as well as facilitating change where required. During Ms. Jackson's time as General Manager, and certainly in my time as General Manager, Bruce has taken on the role of Acting General Manager on many occasions, his longest stint being the period between the two General Managers. He is to be commended for taking on more responsibility, often under trying circumstances, and this is a testament to his character. Bruce has for a long time provided support and encouragement to staff, managers and councillors in more recent times. He has been consistent sounding board and source of knowledge and logic to many, both inside and outside of the council. I would like to acknowledge Bruce for his long service and thank him for his dedication to the public service in the last 8.5 years. He will greatly be missed.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I would just like to add my words to what Mr. Roach has just explained to our community. Bruce has certainly undertaken a very important role, executive role with council, and he's done it, as I've said, in an exemplary way. And it's a mark of the man and his humility that he didn't really want any fuss made of him. We tried to encourage him to come to the meeting today for the purpose of being able to talk about him this way. And Bruce had other work imperatives that he preferred to attend to rather than come for an occasion such as this. We just see that as a mark of, a man who is a very, very capable operator, but at the same time, a no-fuss person, a humble man. And Bruce, your work for council, as I've witnessed myself for the past 6 months, and as other people have witnessed and attested to me, is an example for other people to follow. Everybody at some stage reaches a point in their life where it's time to retire. I know what that feels like because I've reached that time myself. And certainly we understand your decision to retire. You're really retiring on top of things. So that's a great time to go out and a great way to go out. And as you go out, I'm sure that everybody at Norfolk Island Regional Council and in the wider community wishes you all the best for a long and prosperous retirement and a very enjoyable one. So thanks again, Bruce. You've done a great job, much appreciated. I'm going to make a resolution in relation to this, and I resolve that Council acknowledges the outstanding 18.5 years of service Mr. Bruce Taylor has provided both the administration of Norfolk Island, ANI, and Norfolk Island Regional Council, and wishes him well in his retirement. And I will move now to item 20. There are no questions for the next meeting. That brings me to item 21, the close of the council meeting. Mr. Roach, is there anything further before I close the meeting?
No, there isn't, Mr. Administrator.
Then I declare the meeting closed at 2:50 p.m. and I thank everybody for their attendance.
You're off. Done.